want to welcome you all this morning here. I want to acknowledge also the Consular Corps from Atlanta. My job as Vice Provost for International Initiatives is to coordinate our engagement abroad and all our international activities. Georgia Tech has made a very, very strong commitment to global engagement. It's very clear that in the 21st century, our students, our research, our innovation, they all operate in a global set of networks. And we are very proud that almost half of the undergraduate students who get a bachelor's from Georgia Tech have spent at least a semester or a long time abroad. That's quite remarkable for a U.S. university, particularly for a technological institute, and we want to do even more. So we are really committed to global engagement. Today is a really special day. We are really thrilled. I'm really thrilled and honored to be welcoming on campus today the Commissioner for Trade for the European Union, Mr. Karel De Gucht. Georgia Tech has some strong ties with Europe. First of all, there is the Center for European and Transatlantic Studies at the Sound School here in Atlanta. And we also have our main campus abroad is Georgia Tech Lorraine in Metz, France, and we send 600 students every year there. We've had a really strong presence in Europe, and our campus there enables us to do research and education at the European level. And we benefit from FP7, Horizon 2020, and all those good things. So we really have a direct bridge between Europe and Georgia Tech. We're very proud of that. Again, we're really very honored to have the Commissioner with us today. I will be very brief because we're short on time, but let me introduce Alistair Young, who's the Jean Monnet Professor in the Sound School of International Affairs, to do proper introduction. Thank you, Alistair.
I'm also co-director of the Center for European and Transatlantic Studies, and before I start, I should really say a big thank you to my co-director, Vicky Birchfield, in the back there, who's actually done the heavy lifting behind organizing this event. I just get to be the face of the center at this moment. We at the Center, the Nunn School, and Georgia Tech are delighted and honored to be hosting Trade Commissioner De Gucht, along with our co-host, the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, and the Consul General of Greek representing the European Union presidency. For those of you not familiar with the European Union, let me briefly, by way of introduction, explain why we are so pleased to have Commissioner De Gucht with us today. First of all is his role. Trade Commissioner doesn't sound very exciting necessarily to an American ear. He's the European Union's chief trade negotiator. That means he is the equivalent of the United States trade representative. But more than that, he also has responsibilities that overlap with the international portfolio of what here is covered by the Secretary of Commerce. Moreover, trade is an even bigger deal in the European context than it is here in the United States, because trade is one of the most integrated aspects of European integration. The 28 member states of the European Union cannot pursue their own trade policies. They must agree a common line, and Commissioner De Gucht represents them. Secondly, is the importance of the European Union in general. The EU is the world's largest market and most active trader. Though we hear lots about trade with China in the United States, the European Union is actually the second most important destination of goods and a source of goods for the United States. Combined, it is the most important trading partner in goods. If you consider trade and services, and foreign direct investment is by far and away the more important trading partner. In both imports and exports, is the most important market for American transnational corporations. Consequently, in 2011, then United States Trade Representative Ron Kirk said the United States and the European Union share the largest and most complex economic relationship in the world. The third reason we're delighted is the reason he's in town, just to promote the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership negotiations, which is the most ambitious trade negotiation between near peers ever attempted in the world, addressing and attempting to, well, not quite eliminate tariffs on trade between the parties. We're going beyond that to address 21st century trade politics in terms of trying to address regulatory differences in goods and services. to increase liberalization of government procurement, a particular issue for the state of Georgia, and also to further liberalize investment. Commissioner De Gucht has an extremely impressive career, not least because he manages to hold multiple important, imposing positions at the same time. I struggle to do the one I've got. He trained as a lawyer and has been a professor of European law at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels for many years. He continues to give occasional lectures there. He's been elected to legislative office at the local, regional, national, and European levels. He served in the Belgian government as Minister of Trade, Minister for Foreign Affairs and European Affairs, and as Deputy Prime Minister. He was appointed to the European Commission in 2009, initially as Commissioner for Development and Humanitarian Aid, before becoming Commissioner for Trade in 2010. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner De Gucht.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, I am delighted to be with you at this great institution, the Georgia Institute of Technology, and this in the great city of Atlanta, the innovative heart of the Southern American economy, and also the home to Gone by the Wind. I come from another great institution, the European Union, that brings together 28 individual countries in a partnership for prosperity and peace. And I'm here to talk about building a third, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which seeks to harness open markets to deliver innovation and prosperity to people on both sides of the Atlantic. The ties between Europe and America are older than the United States itself. Even today, a third of Georgians claim ancestry from a member country of the European Union. And many on both sides of the Atlantic will remember the vital role this state's airmen and women, aircraft and shipbuilders played in America's support for Europe, first in the Second World War and in the Cold War thereafter. These close ties and others like them with places all across the United States are the bedrock of today's transatlantic relationship. But even as we take the time to appreciate the past, we must also focus on the future. As strongly as our history is, we need to keep building new ties every day. Because the connections between Europe and the United States that are so important for our societies and economies today will be even more important in the changed world of the 21st century. And that's true for all parts of this country and for all the member states of the European Union. Georgia, the economic and innovation hub of the Southeast, with huge investments from European firms, is no exception. And that fact is what the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership recognizes. I will talk to you this morning about what this negotiation aims to achieve and what that means in terms of opportunities for both sides and Georgia in particular. The goal of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is clearly spelled out in this name. European Union and the United States want to boost trade and investment across the Atlantic to deliver growth and jobs to our people. And that includes this state of Georgia. And how is this going to work? Well, since these talks were launched 8 months ago, our teams of trade negotiators have been hard at work, painstaking, detailed work that will continue until we are finished. The reason that work is so challenging is that we are trying to examine and remove as many of the obstacles to doing business across the Atlantic as they can. That involves some of the oldest trade barriers like custom duties. Tariffs on most goods traded across the Atlantic are low. But even low tariffs are important when 700 billion euros of trade is involved. That's the order of magnitude, 2 billion euros a day. We shouldn't forget that almost 18% of Georgia's exports go to the European Union already now. Eliminating tariffs on those products will benefit people here directly. And for some products, tariffs are higher. That's the case for many agricultural products, for example, always and still a vital part of this state's economy. If we can reduce the impact of these tariffs, that will also benefit here. The same goes for the car sector, another big part of the Georgian economy that faces high duties in the European Union. Getting rid of those tariffs would also have a positive impact on the local economy here. But in today's integrated transatlantic economy, we need to go beyond tariffs. So negotiators are also looking at ways to free up trade for services companies like airlines, finance, shipping, and the digital economy. One of the most important trends in both our economies is the rising importance of services, as tasks once carried out within manufacturing firms are now carried out by service providers. And this means that not only are services increasingly significant themselves, they are also essential for trade in goods. When we measure the real value that is added in each of our economies, roughly half of the exports from both Europe and the United States are services today. For a state like Georgia, which hosts the headquarters of Delta Airlines, Home Depot, and First Data, this fact may not be much of a shock. Our aim for this deal is to remove market access as well as by tying down existing openness for companies like these. We are also looking to open up opportunities in government procurement. The benefits here are twofold. Like it or not, governments, whether national, regional, or local, are some of the biggest spenders in our economies. Georgia alone spends around $10 billion a year on goods and services. The European Union's own market is estimated to be worth as much as $600 billion. So open government procurement markets mean business opportunity for exporting firms, whether that's paper or transport equipment, both big Georgia exports. At the same time, opening procurement markets also helps governments spend our money better because we get a bigger choice of goods and services at cheaper prices. Ronald Reagan said once that the taxpayer was someone who works for the government but doesn't have to take the civil service examination. If that's the case, then it's in everyone's interest that the government gets the best value for our money, and that goes for taxpayers here in Georgia too. Beyond these issues of access to markets, our negotiators are also looking for ways to reaffirm and strengthen our rules on intellectual property rights, on trading in raw materials and energy, and on how officials deal with goods at the border. But the most significant part and the most important part of the negotiation, and what makes it unique, is regulation. European Union and the United States are among the most heavily regulated societies in the world. And there are good reasons for this. We regulate to keep our air clean, to keep our banks solvent, and to keep our microwaves from exploding. But the differences between our regulations on both sides of the Atlantic do create costs for businesses. If a pharmaceutical plant, like the new one Baxter is building just west of here in Covington, has to be inspected twice by European and American inspectors, that takes time and it takes money. If a company that makes car parts like Robert Bosch, which has operations in this region, has to have 2 production lines to make different car parts for each market, that costs time and money. If a medical device firm like Siemens, which has several sites in and around Atlanta, has to make its products traceable in two different ways that also cost time and money. And we all know only too well what can happen when the regulation of financial services goes wrong. European Union believes that this agreement can create a new framework for transatlantic regulatory cooperation in this area. And it doesn't mean repeating discussions we've already had in the national bodies like the G20, but rather having an institutional framework to ensure our rules work together in order to prevent future crises. So what we are doing in this negotiation is trying to find ways to make our regulation more compatible while making sure we keep our food as safe, our air as clean and our microwaves as non-combustible as possible. We are doing that by looking at the way we will make regulation in the future, to make sure it's open and that regulators cooperate. But we are also looking at the way sectors like the ones I've just mentioned are regulated today. These three areas, market access, rules and regulation, are what this deal is about in substance. And they allow us to see clearly some of the benefits of a deal like this. But there are three more points worth making about the benefits from this agreement. The first is that we are not just talking about big business. In fact, small companies are hurt more by barriers to international trade than multinationals. Why? Because they don't always have the resources to get around those barriers. So this deal, by reducing trade costs across the board, would bring greater benefits to smaller firms than larger ones. Think about it. If a new company is born with access to the whole European market, all American market, we can say it has a very good start in life. But while the US market is big, there is one economic area on the planet that is even larger. And that's the internal market of the European Union. Our 500 million citizens have a combined income of almost 1/5 of the world GDP. So if our new startup also has access to the European market, we would have to say that it has been born with a silver spoon in its mouth. And given that smaller companies like the ones that this university does such a good job of creating tend to be the most innovative, that privilege will be a boost for the dynamism of the whole transatlantic economy. The second point worth making is on investment. In most sectors of our economies, investment barriers are low. And this is one of the reasons investment between the US and Europe is so intense already, and why European investment in Georgia already supports around 80,000 jobs. This deal will deepen that successful relationship even more. Where barriers do remain, we will certainly try to remove them. Like in airlines, for example, where it is difficult for Europeans to invest on this side of the Atlantic. But it is important to understand that all of the other provisions of this agreement will also boost investment. In a world of global value chains, where products are made in a series of steps in many different locations, often in many different countries, and in different continents, investment and trade are deeply interlinked. Economists have estimated that Georgia's exports to the EU rise by more than 30% because of this agreement. If we can do that, as well as boost trade in the opposite direction, then we will also boost foreign direct investment and all the good jobs that go with it. The final point worth making concerns the strategic aim of these negotiations. What we are doing here is strengthening a partnership between the two largest economies in the world today for the changes coming in the 21st century. And two aspects of the new global economy are essential to understand what we are doing: the degree of its integration and the change in its overall balance. The degree of integration through the value chains I already mentioned means that strong, clear international trade rules are more and more important for local economies. Small changes in government policies half a world away, in Asia can affect workers here in Georgia. We already have a good global rule book for trade in the form of the World Trade Organization. And it's very good news that the United States and the European Union worked with our counterparts from other countries to put the WTO back on track in December in Bali. But even if we do everything on the WTO's agenda today, there will still be gaps in that global rulebook. Because as you have seen, it's not just other governments' policies on tariffs that affects people here in Georgia. It can also be the way they regulate to make sure medicines are safe, or the way they protect intellectual property rights or fail to do so. Good international rules on this kind of issues will be difficult to achieve, very difficult. And that's because these are complicated problems to solve. You want to open markets, but you have to do that in a way that keeps people protected from risks to their health or to the environment. But if we can get agreement on an overall approach between the two largest economies in the world, we will be moving in the right direction. That will not be enough, however. The changing balance of the world economy, with the rise of new powers in Asia, Latin America, and soon in Africa, means that the Transatlantic Agreement will only be the start of a global negotiation. And in these negotiations, the fact is that Europe and America will in future have much less weight than we have today. By some estimates, our combined share of the world output could drop by as much as half by 2050. We are now 50%, we would become 25% in a generation's time. And that means we will each be less able to continue to champion the rules-based international system that has underwritten the world economy over the last 60 years. We will also individually be less able to push for global rules that are based on high standards for health, the environment, labor, and consumer protection. And on all these issues, the reality is that the EU and the US would be better off pulling together. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is an important way to do so. So, ladies and gentlemen, for all these reasons, we need to seize the opportunity of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership to build new ties between the European Union and the United States. The agreement will directly lead to more jobs and growth in communities here in Georgia, across the United States, and across the European Union. It will, and it is not an easy negotiation, because for all we share in common, we do have our differences. We will both have to make changes if we want a good result. And that means we will need to approach this negotiation with creativity and energy to find the solutions that allow us to not only keep our values intact, but to strengthen them for the future. The European Union is ready to do its part to achieve that, and I hope the people of Georgia are with us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have about 15 minutes for questions. If you please raise your hand and identify yourself.
Jared Hayes from the School of International Affairs here at Georgia Tech. I wonder if you would elaborate a little bit more on the challenges confronting this particular agreement. Seems from your talk as well as coverage in the media that it should be a no-brainer, and yet we see that there are difficulties in terms of bringing the two parties together.
What were you thinking about?
I just wondered if you would, if you could elaborate at any greater depth in terms of the challenges confronting the agreement.
Oh, there will be many challenges, because it's a very broad agreement that encompasses not only the traditional items of free trade negotiations, which is merely market access for products, tariffs, for investment, for services and for public procurement, but you have also this regulatory approach. Now already in the market access approach we will face a number of very difficult problems to solve. For example, United States what they would really want is full and free access to the European market for their agricultural products. That's what you would like to do. Now this is impossible. I mean, you would never get an agreement on that in Europe. So we will have to negotiate a path through these problems. On the other hand, we in Europe are of the opinion, we are not necessarily true, but we think that you are much more protectionist than we are. For example, on public procurement. This state negotiated an agreement, a GPA agreement, a government procurement agreement, which is an agreement within the WTO. But Georgia at the very end jumped out. They didn't want this burden. No? Now, we will have to discuss by American and by Georgia and you name it regulations. No? And we would certainly want to have national treatment in this, that it doesn't any longer apply to us. Now, it will not be very easy. You have the Jones Act going back to 1920, which is about shipping in your territorial waters, and shipping in the broadest sense of the word. For example, also dredging and you name it. We would like to at least make away with part of it before its centenary. So yeah, it will be difficult also when you look at the regulatory, especially for existing regulations. Once you have a regulation, you probably think that yours is the best. No? If not, you wouldn't have made it. So ask people to change what they have already been deciding will certainly not be easy. You have to, when you look at the internal markets, how we did it in Europe, the internal market, we did it almost solely by mutual recognition on the basis of a number of decisions by the European Court of Justice. Now, before we got those decisions of the European Court of Justice, we were struggling to build an internal market by harmonizing and by making it compatible and so on and so on. It never worked. It only worked once we could go to mutual recognition, but that would be very, very, very difficult between the European Union and the United States, no? Because the differences are, well, they have a bigger, how would I say, percentage of culture in it, no? Culture in the broadest sense of the word. So it would be very, very difficult to do that. Are we going to do this? Are we going to be able to do this without mutual recognition? Certainly for the existing ones. Now there are a number of industrial sectors that have come forward with a common plan by European and American companies, for example on automotive, and there is an agreement between European and American companies, car companies and parts and components companies, what should happen. That's a good start. No? We have that also for chemicals, for pharmaceuticals, for medical devices, by example, excuse me. So it can be done. And once you have a couple of examples, then probably it could also evolve into other sectors. But this is a real minefield, you know, obviously. But and I believe that if it were only for purely economic reasons, we would never get there. But the overriding reason, I think, once we come to the hard problems to tackle, will be the geostrategical importance of this agreement. If it were only for purely economic benefits, I mean, I think everybody at a certain moment in time would say, oh, that's it's giving me too many headaches, stop it. You know? But it's about our economic survival in the economy of the 21st century. And that we have in common, and that we have to do something about. And that becomes more and more clear, you know. Let me give you one example. You know the company Huawei, no? Huawei, and they are producing mobile networks. Chinese company, very successful, so-called private, but very tightly state-controlled. No? You have shut them out of your market. They cannot deliver anymore in the United States. They still can in Europe. We are asking them to participate in their norms and standard setting process. They can do that, and they do that in Europe, and we do not have access to them. No, that's what is really happening, you know. That's where we should have more grip on. That no norms and standard developing can happen without us being part of it. And the only way to do that is to be the biggest and to put the benchmark. In an open way, we have no idea whatsoever to exclude anybody, but we should not end up in a situation that others can exclude us. That's what is really the geostrategical importance of this. And that's why I believe we will have an agreement, yes, but it will be painstaking.
Karel De Gucht, I'm a professor in the Nantes School. You suggested that TTIP could be the start of a global arrangement, yet it seems that what we're seeing is a trend toward mega-regionalism, because we also have the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in Asia. So are we really moving toward a global arrangement or further away from it?
You have a lot of negotiations, bilateral ones, regional ones, and we should, I think, ask ourselves why does this happen, you know? So, and the main reason is, of course, that we do not manage to make progress at the multilateral level within the WTO. We have recently been concluding an agreement, the so-called Trade Facilitation Agreement in Bali, which is an important agreement, by the way, very, very important, and also, for example, for this place, you know, because delivery services like UPS and so on will certainly take profit of that. So if they are part of that trade facilitation. It was a hard battle to have them in. Last night we worked the whole night through to get to a text. And it's very important for developed economies, but also for us, because you're losing enormous time and money in shipping containers, for example, to the developing countries, whatever. But I don't think that in the foreseeable future we're going to get to a global agreement, let's say, to close really the Doha development agenda. I don't think so. I hope so. And we will certainly support the new Director General Azevedo if he tries to do so. But I think it will be extremely difficult for a number of reasons. But the main reason we don't get to global agreements in the WTO is because the paradigm of the DDA is not valid anymore. We started the Doha development round. Well, we first tried to do it in Seattle with some manifestations, no? But more than a decade ago in Doha, no? And the paradigm of the Doha development agenda is that you have an asymmetry between the obligations of the LDCs, the least developed countries, the developing countries, the emerging economies, and the mature economies. That's the paradigm. No? Now, what is the problem? That in the last decade, this has changed because the emerging economies have emerged, and certainly China. And they would still like to benefit from this big asymmetry, you know. And the United States are saying, with good reason, no, they have to do exactly the same as we do. And that's not going to happen very soon. We have tried 2 years ago to have some sectorals on machinery, on electronics, and on chemicals. And the idea behind those sectors was that the asymmetry would become smaller. The effort by the emerging economies would be 50% and ours 66%. But even then we couldn't reach an agreement, you know. And that's why it is stuck. There is good reason to say, now you have to do the same as we do. And by the way, not only on NAMA, on non-agricultural market access for industrial products, but for example also for services. They should do the same on subsidies. It's a big dispute. It's part of the DA, the whole discussion on subsidies. The Chinese are spoiling the market with subsidies. I mean, that's a fact of life, no? And as long as you don't get to a basic agreement on that, I think it will be very, very difficult to do it at the multilateral level. But at the same time, big economies as ours have to react to globalization. Globalization, we did not invent that, you know. Globalization has come because of technical reasons, cheap transport and communication that has become much quicker, much swifter. You have to react to that. So you have to organize yourself. But I do not believe that the kind of agreements that we negotiate, and for example the one between the EU and the US, is hindering the multilateral agenda. Because what we are really doing is lifting the ceiling. Most of what we discuss in TTIP, it's in any case WTO plus, in any case. No? You can't even dream of negotiating on regulations in the WTO. No? So we are lifting the ceiling, and I think that by lifting the ceiling, you will also create oxygen that makes it possible to lift the floor. I truly believe that this is going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but I'm pretty sure that within a decade, the whole trade landscape will be different. And there is another good reason to do it at the multilateral level. To manage all this very complicated network of agreements, you know, you need to be a big economy. We can do that, you can do that, but even a middle-sized country cannot do that, you know. You need a lot of people to do so, to monitor this. I mean, it has a cost, no? And if you were to have global rules, the cost would be much lower. So also us would like to see that a number of things that we are discussing now is translated at the multilateral level anytime soon. Now, in the meantime, there are a number of negotiations going on within the WTO that are not multilateral but plurilateral. And I'm just giving this example, you will immediately see why. It's the ITA, is the Information Technology Agreement. It's TISA, it's Trade in Services Agreement. And now also recently the one on green goods, and that we would like to get to 0%. Now, what do we see? We see that China wants to be part of those negotiations. And that's a change in their behavior. But once they are in, what they are most interested in is to make sure that doesn't happen too quickly. Very good example is we launched 3 weeks ago in the margin of the Davos meeting the new plurilateral on green goods. No? And China didn't want to participate because they were of the opinion that it was much too ambitious, and no, they were not going to do that unless we were going to change a lot of things. Okay. United States and ourselves said, Mike Froman and myself, okay, then we do it alone, with Mexico, with Japan, and those who are really interested. So the press conference was organized. At the very last moment, the Chinese came in and said, no, we are nevertheless going to sign, you know. And they signed up, so we had to postpone the press meeting by half an hour because we have to change the text and put it in the People's Republic of China. So, but it's an indication of what people are going to do. They want to be in. And they also ask for our support so that they will be part of the Trade and Services Agreement. We said, okay, but then you have to accept what has already been decided. You have to accept the so-called acquis, no? Well, there you have, again, a whole discussion. But it means that they start realizing that they have to become more and more part of the, let's say, the global governance of trade. But it will take time. So that's my answer.
I'm afraid we're out of time. They're very strict about getting us out of here. So I'd ask you to please join me in thanking Commissioner De Gucht